Hey, Mystery Movie Recapped here. Today I am going to explain the Half-Life 2006 movie. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. Please like and subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon to get new videos update. The movie starts in a small house in London located near a canal. We meet Rachel Carlson, an American murder mystery novelist. Rachel lives with her second husband Brian, who works as a book editor, and her 5-year-old son Thomas. Brian has returned home and has received an email. It's a rejection letter from a publishing company about his future book Fade Away. Rachel doesn't pay much attention to Brian and instead focuses on typing. He heads outside on his own as he can't wait any longer. Brian comes into the room a minute later and shares his news with her. Rachel says that they also rejected her first book too and continues working. Meanwhile, Thomas opens the gate that leads to the canal. He walks down and begins playing with the water. Rachel begins to call for Thomas but she doesn't hear back from him. She then discovers the gate is wide open. She heads down the stairs to the canal and continues calling out to her son. She then sees his action figure floating in the water next to a wooden boat. She moves the boat out of the way, only to make the unfortunate discovery that her son has drowned. Fast forward 8 months, Rachel is driving to the coastal region of Scotland looking for a new home. She blames herself for the death of Thomas, and due to her inability to reconcile his passing, she can no longer finish her book. The tragedy has also put a tremendous burden on her marriage. She has fallen out with love with her husband, and Brian is asking if they should divorce. Though she did not commit to the idea, she says they should deal with it later. Rachel's attitude towards Brian has changed, as she has put all the blame on him, accusing him of leaving the gate open. He is tired of her non-stop thinking about Thomas, and also being labeled as the one at fault. She eventually settles on a house on the coast, all by itself. The only thing in its line of sight, a lighthouse on an island far away from her. She calls her friend Sharon to tell her about the house's location, letting her know she will be fine. She walks around and discovers neighbors along the way, Finley Murray and his wife Mary Murphy, who point her to the town. As she arrives, a lone woman sitting on a bench named Morag. Morag tells her that her son is waiting for her on the swings. Rachel questions whose son, but Morag backs off and claims mistaken identity. Leaving town, she heads to a beach and gets a boat to the lighthouse. She explores the island, taking photos of the horses that roam the area. Making her last stop to take a picture of the lighthouse. Just then, a man named Angus spooks her unintentionally, only to remark that the lighthouse is impressive. He lets her know that they should become friends since they are now neighbors, and she agrees that they should. Later that night, as she is going through Thomas' belongings, she finds a cryptic message, saying to look behind her, which makes her feel uneasy. When she turns around, she sees her own reflection in the mirror, scaring herself and dropping the sketch. Upon picking it back up, the message has vanished. The next night, she suddenly sees Thomas outside on the dock by her house. She rushes to hug him, and tells him not to go. He then tells her to come and be with him. Puzzled turns to panic as Thomas pulls her into the water and attempts to drown her. She wakes up in a panic and it turns out to be just a bad dream. Slowly catching her breath, she looks over and sees Thomas standing next to her again. He lunges at her neck, she wakes up again. Another day passes, and she has now decided that she needs a break from typing to go and see Angus. Getting a tour of the place, she learns the Angus lives by himself. Angus, his father, and his grandfather all have lived in that lighthouse, so he could never leaves. He takes Rachel to the top and sees the horizon in all its magnificence. Rachel gives Angus one of her books and departs from the island looking much happier than before. Some time has started to go by. Angus and Rachel spend more time with each other, walking on the beach, riding horses, and just enjoying his company. Rachel shares about her enjoyable experiences and life by the waves with Angus with Sharon. One day, she and Angus decide to take photo by some ruins on the island. At first, Rachel is joyful, but after the shutter and flash go off, she starts flashing back to the time she was with her son. She snaps back out of it when Angus notices her still frozen, asking her if she is alright. She only tells him that she needs to go back, and that she is sorry. Sometime later she is at a local bar, alone and zoning out, when Morag approaches and mentions about the gate, which Rachel left open. Morag informs her that Thomas is trying to follow her, still dripping wet, and attempting to hold her hand. All these words from Morag cause Rachel to drop her glass. Finley helps her clean the glass and tells her to disregard what Morag says, accusing her of being an attention seeker. At home, she finds another cryptic message written with the alphabets on her refrigerator. Drift, she comes to see Angus. Finally feeling better about her life, she goes to a birthday party for Mary. She asks Mary if she has seen Angus yet. Her question surprises everyone there. Mary tells her that Angus and his wife Kate died 7 years before. Everyone else at the party confirms the reality, leading Rachel to go mad. She starts to think Angus might have never been alive.
I was with him right here last night.
You couldn't have been. 7 years ago.
Upon leaving the party and going back to the lighthouse, Finley tells her that Kate had an affair with a fisherman. In the rage and chaos of finding out, Angus shoved her into the furnace, killing her. Angus killed the fisherman by impaling him with a hook, hoisting him up, then he jumped from the top of the lighthouse. She looks for evidence that he is alive, even calling Sharon and talking to her about it. She tells her that Angus must have been her imagination. Worried for Rachel, Sharon decides to come to her to take her home. Disbelieving what is happening, Rachel goes back to the lighthouse and climbs to the top as she thought she saw Angus up there. Just as Rachel gets to the top, Sharon arrives. Rachel comes back down and tells her to imagine Angus away. Rachel sees Angus behind Sharon and tells her to turn around, even forcing her to turn around to see Angus, but Sharon doesn't see him. Turning her back to Angus, he stabs Sharon to death. Rachel goes to Finley for help, but they get back. Sharon's body is gone. Worried she has imagined it all, Rachel then calls her friend Robert to go check on Sharon. Robert then calls Brian and tells him that he thinks something is wrong with Rachel. Unbeknownst to Robert, Brian is already in Rachel's house. We then see Sharon, very much alive, meet up with Angus at a bar. It is revealed that Sharon and Brian decided to kill Rachel, and Angus is a part of it. Brian's reason is for the money she has, and Sharon because of her Evney. Angus is actually a man named Patrick and is warned better not have fallen for Rachel, or his whole life may have collapsed. Before leaving town, Patrick recalls throwing the film from Rachel's camera behind the ruins and goes to wipe out any other existence of him ever being there. Alone at home, Rachel thinks she hears something outside her house. She investigates, and initially thinks she is mistaken. Turns out Brian is still there and comes from behind her and puts her to sleep. Patrick, now with the camera reel, looks to leave the island, but is stopped when he starts thinking about Rachel. She investigates, and initially thinks she is mistaken. Turns out Brian is still there and comes from behind her and puts her to sleep. Patrick, now with the camera reel, looks to leave the island, but is stopped when he starts thinking about Rachel. He ventures back the lighthouse, but to his horror, something attacks him. At the same time, Morag goes and warns Finley about Rachel, and is convinced by Mary to go investigate. Now Rachel has been taken on a boat crewed by Brian and Sharon, and Brian is close to throwing her overboard with an anchor around her feet. Just before he does, the lighthouse starts emitting light, and both don't realize Rachel is reawakening. Before she can grab the key to undo the lock around her leg, Brian pushes her. She is able to hang onto the boat for a bit, before being pushed overboard. Struggling in the water, Rachel cannot undo the lock to the anchor. Before she passes out, she hears Thomas Ord showing her the key. When she does, she sees the key that can free her. She surfaces and heads to shore. Both Sharon and Brian have gone into the lighthouse looking for Patrick, thinking he turned on the lights, only to be confronted by Rachel, who has found a flare gun. She tells Brian to tie himself up but ends up in a struggle with Sharon. Misfiring the flare inside, Brian attacks Rachel, but the impact of his spirit sends Sharon into the furnace, killing her. Brian follows Rachel up the stairs of the lighthouse but is stopped by Patrick. However, he denies being Patrick, and stabs Brian with a hook chain. Patrick then goes to the top of the lighthouse, stares down Rachel, then places the seashell in her hand, and jumps off the top to his death. All three have mirrored the way Kate, the fisherman, and Angus died in the past. Some time has passed, and the conspiracy has become public. At Rachel's house, Finale tells Rachel he will keep people off the island to let Angus's spirit rest. Morag gives her a last piece of advice, and tells Rachel to let go of Thomas's death. They hug it out, and Rachel leaves her house. She then goes back to her original house at the near lake, and from the beginning of the story, she sits in the same place she had when she took the picture with her son Thomas. Rachel finally comes to peace with that day. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on the notifications and leave a like to help the channel. Thank you for watching.